A very good evening, everybody. Welcome to the third of our pre-concert talks and the third of our gala concerts. At 8 o'clock, we have the early music group Resurgam performing. They recorded in St Finbarr's Cathedral here in Cork earlier in the week. And we're very pleased that Mark Duley, their director, is joining us. Very good evening, Mark. You're in Galway, aren't you?
I am, yeah, just
Yeah.
north of Dublin.
And we were hoping earlier that your internet is going to hold out for the duration of the talk. I need to remind everybody that we are recorded and being live streamed on Facebook and YouTube. So Mark, we've got a program of, you've called it Barkham before, and we've got music by, it's all German. Well, it's almost all German with the exception of Monteverdi. We've got Shine, Schütz, and Bach, with little bits of Monteverdi. Could you just give us an overview, maybe, just to start with, as to how you put the program together?
Sure. Well, the starting point was the Bach motet Jesu meine Freude. Um, and we wanted to give a little flavour of what had happened really in the previous century, that all those marvellous influences that really come together in Bach in so many ways, and particularly in that motet. So we thought we would explore some of the wonderful and not so well-known German choral repertoire from the first part of the 17th century, and two figures that I think are really very important in that tradition that led to Bach. So we chose Johann Schein and Heinrich Schütz. Johann Schein is a very interesting character, I think. He was, of course, a predecessor of Bach's. He was a cantor in the Thomaskirche in Leipzig, so there's a lovely connection there. And both Schein and Schütz assimilate so much of the Italian style that they admired so much. So they bring together this Italian style with the German Lutheran choral tradition, and there's a marvelous fusion, I think, of those two elements. And the final flowering of this sort of wonderful cross-pollination, if you like, really is in Bach. So it sort of brings that all together, I think. That was the basic structure, and then we thought we would put in some Monteverdi as well, as sort of two little sorbets in the midst of all the German, just to give a little bit of a not quite light relief, but yeah, a different sort of texture, and also to make that German-Italian connection, which is so important with Schein and Schütz.
Yes, I suppose the Italian collection in Germany perhaps is linked a little bit to Lassus back in the 1550s, 60s, and 70s. Lassus was based in Munich, wasn't he? But it was always in and out of Italy. Is there am I barking up the wrong tree here?
No, you're not. You're quite right. I think Lassus is the first truly European composer in a way, and that so much of that ultramontane sort of view was there with Lassus. So yeah, it wasn't that this sort of thing started with Schein and Schütz, and it was there before with Lassus, certainly.
And Lassus, I think, was particularly famous in his day. So I would guess that Schein and Schütz would have known his motets probably. Obviously, they're in the north of Germany, in Dresden and Leipzig, and Lassus is down in Munich. But I would imagine that, as you say, Lassus would be well known enough.
I would think so. Yes, I'm sure they did.
So maybe if we start off with the Schein. It's a collection of 26 madrigals, I think, isn't it? The Israelis Brünnlein, if I've got that right.
It is.
And you've chosen 4 of those. What way do you think the music is Italian? Is there more you can tell us about that? Because of course it's sacred music, and I would have thought, well, I mean, the Lassus pieces would be secular probably, in terms of the Italian style. Is there any of that in this music?
They are sacred, but they are in a way madrigals. You describe them as madrigals. They sort of escape classification in a way, but you could describe them as madrigals. There's a sort of madrigal sensibility about them, but I don't think they are. I think there's something else as well. I think there's very much a German sensibility about them as well, in the way that Schein enters into the world of the text and uses a lot of the rhetorical devices from the musica poetica tradition, which was so important in Germany at the time. And you can see Shine thinking like an orator would think in terms of how to approach the text and get his point across. So they are Italian, but they're also very German at the same time. That's why I think they're quite extraordinary. They bring these two traditions together in quite a unique way, I think.
And moving on to the Schutz, again, it's another collection of I think 29 sacred motets, and you've chosen 4 of those. Are they similar to the Shine? I was listening into your rehearsing, and I wasn't sure really if I could pinpoint Schutz and make it distinct from Shine. Is there any help you can give me there, Mark?
They are very similar. For a start, the scoring is the same because we were looking for works that matched our scoring. We have 2 sopranos, an alto, tenor, bass, so we need something in 5 parts with double sopranos. So the Geistliches Chor music from 1648 was an obvious collection to choose from. But they are subtly different, more refined in a way. With the sort of the longer view, if you like. I think Schutz takes a more a sort of longer view into how he enters the text. Shine is a little bit more immediate. You see straight away what he's trying to say. With Schutz, it's a little bit more cumulative, I feel, and it's not quite so expressive in that way. It doesn't use those rhetorical devices in such an obvious way. So yeah, that's where I would see the chief difference, I think.
Sure. And before we move on to talk about Monteverdi and Bach, maybe maybe you could just tell us a little bit about Resurgam. And you mentioned you only had 5 singers. Is that normal? Would you quite often have more than that? I know obviously we're being COVID conscious when we invited you here.
Yeah.
What's the history of the group? Just give us an outline.
The group was founded back in 2003, and we have quite a pool of singers that we draw from, and it really depends what we're doing. We have had up to, I think we had 32 singers for one concert, which would be highly unusual for us. When we did the Schnittke Concerto for Choir, we had a very big group for that. But usually we would have 12, 16, 8. But we're doing more and more work with just single voices, one voice per part, which is a special joy, I think. It's chamber music, and it's wonderful to see the way the voices work together and the musicians really find new things in the music that you might not find so easily if you had 2 or 3 people per part.
So, and do you always concentrate on music of this sort of period?
Mostly, but we have done music from later periods. We've done a couple of premieres recently of new choral works. We've also sung quite a lot of music from the Russian Orthodox choral tradition, which is a particular favorite area of repertoire for me. I love it.
Gosh, that seems very different.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. But it's very exciting to do, and a little bit like the early repertoire, there are all sorts of things to discover about how to sing this music. Things that wouldn't really occur to those of us who've been brought up in, our sort of choral tradition. We really do have to think outside the box with that repertoire as well, in terms of understanding how the voice works and how the language works as well. So I find it a very interesting area.
And using these small numbers, as you say, it's one to a part. We'll move on to Bach shortly, but for Shine and Schutz, do we know if that's how they were performing it? Or would they have had larger choirs? Are you being, and I'm going to use the word authentic, we won't go down that rabbit hole, but are you being a little bit authentic by using one to a part?
Yeah, yes, I mean, there's been a huge amount of study in this. The jury is still out with some composers, Bach being one case in point. I mean, some people are very adamant that he would have only had 1 singer per part. Others would argue that there were more. With Shine and Schutz, I think there's a much greater probability that they did have single voices. If you look at the musical establishments where they work, particularly with Schutz, we do know quite a bit about his establishment and the way the instruments would have worked with the voices as well. It was a sort of interchangeability. You could have 1 voice on a line, or you could have 1 instrument. Probably there was quite a lot of doubling as well, where instruments and voices might have sung together on particular lines. What I sort of come to the conclusion is that it's, in a way, it's all up for grabs, because what I've discovered, particularly working with instruments, is that the music will tell you what works best. And particularly when you're working with wind instruments, as we have been recently, we found all sorts of new things in the way the instruments and voices work together and are complementary. So it's a voyage of discovery for me, and I think one needs to be open-minded about it, really.
And just thinking about the instruments, you've got this evening, you've got a small chamber organ, and
Yeah.
you've got Siobhan Armstrong on the harp, haven't you?
Yeah.
Just is that a specific choice for this repertoire, or is that
Well,
are
it's
they,
actually
is that
something
normal for you?
yeah, Shine with a 1626 publication, Opera Nova, he talked about the desirability of having two continuo instruments, organ and one plucked instrument, he says. So that could be harp, it could be theorbo, you know, he doesn't actually specify, but certainly the color of organ and a plucked continuo instrument is identified by him as highly desirable and sort of the ideal combination. I find it works beautifully. It's such a lovely sound. And Siobhan's triple harp is a wonderful alternative to the theorbo, and it has an added range as well, particularly in the higher part of the register that you wouldn't get so easily with the theorbo. So it's, and also she can play a little bit of 16 foot as well with some of the lower strings. So it's, yeah, it works really well.
I suppose it's the contrast, isn't it, between the organ, which is almost like another singer in its tone, perhaps,
Yeah.
and then the plucking, which is a little bit more percussive, I suppose, you know, from the harp.
Yes, there's a lovely texture there that you get with the combination of those two textures. And with the tuning system we're using, they really integrate incredibly well. We find that that mix is great.
I was going to talk about Bach, but you've just mentioned there the tuning system. And again, whilst I was listening in, there were moments where I was thinking, "Gosh, that's really not what I was expecting." And then you maybe redid the passage again, and it was still it was sung in exactly the same way, and maybe to some of our ears it might sound out of tune. Um,
Yes.
Without going into too much detail, can you explain what's
We
going
be
on
here
with the
for a very
tuning?
long time. Well, we're using a system of tuning called mean tone tuning. Um, without getting too technical, it just means that some keys are very in tune and some keys are very out of tune. The in tune keys have things that we, with our modern tuning system, are not really used to, particularly the thirds. The thirds are pure, which means they're very low compared to the equally tempered thirds of the piano, which are very sharp. So it's quite a job to get these thirds in tune. The singers have to sing much flatter than they think they should. Um, but when it does work, when they do that, you get a wonderful resonance there. All the harmonics lock together, and the music takes on a completely different sheen to my ears. It's a challenge, but it's very rewarding. And of course, is the sound world that these composers worked in. Equally, the well-tempered tunings of Bach didn't really, and similar tunings didn't happen until later. And of course, equal temperament didn't really become popular until the late 19th century. So, but this mean tone tuning, we know that I think it was Gloucester Cathedral organ when Wesley was there, the organ was still in mean tone tuning, interestingly. So it's not as sort of far back in time as we think.
Yes, and that's around it sort of 1800, isn't it?
That's right.
Yeah, yes. It's very interesting, and of course we should point out that your singers are absolutely expert, and it's not that they're out of tune in in the normal sense. They're actually working very hard, aren't they? And I think it took a little bit of time, you know, once they arrived, to actually
Yeah.
to adjust to it,
Oh,
to
it
sort of
does,
settle
yeah.
into
Particularly
it,
if you've been
doesn't it?
singing other repertoire, like modern repertoire, and singing in a modern tuning, to have to make that switch it is a big switch. Um, but the organ helps and the harp helps hugely, and they listen to each other, and there are a few things that a few what's the word? Not quite rules, but you know, if you see a sharp in the music, it's always going to be tuned very flat. If you see a flat, it's going to be tuned sharp. The thirds are going to be low, the fifths are going to be a little bit brighter. There are various things that you can remember to help you.
So it sort of goes against your instinct, doesn't it? You see the
Oh,
sharp, you sing flat.
That's
Yeah,
right.
you'd expect it to be the other way around.
Yeah.
So going to the Bach, which is sort of the most substantial piece, I suppose. It's in 11 sections, isn't it? This is one of the 6 motets, Jesu meine Freude. It's in 11 different sections, and it's based around around a chorale, isn't it? Just tell us
It is.
maybe a little bit about the structure.
It's a very interesting structure because there is the chorale, but then there is this text from St. Paul's letter to the Romans. It's sort of palindromic in a way. There's basically a sequence of movements alternating the chorale with these settings from St. Paul's letter to the Romans. But it's all about death. I mean, all the best music is about death, really, isn't it? And I think this is no exception.
Oh, absolutely, yes.
So, so
Lent
it's
is my favorite time of the year. It's, you know, the miserable stuff is always the
oh,
best.
I love it. Yeah, yeah. And for a church musician particularly, it's just there's so many goodies there. But here, I think Bach is taking 2 approaches to death. So there's our response, if you like, um, our human response to death as expressed in the chorale, and then there is as it were, the spirit calling the soul to heaven, as expressed in the scriptural passages that are used. So there's this 2-layered approach to the theme of death and the afterlife in the motet, and it's so beautifully constructed because the movements alternate, and yet some of the chorale settings are almost in the concertante style. So after a while, you're not quite sure. You know, he blurs the edges a little bit there. But the central point of the work, which is at the center of the palindrome, if you like, is this wonderful fugue, where this wonderfully lively subject, full of semiquaver runs, is full of the spirit. It talks about you are not in the flesh, you are in the spirit, and the fugue really captures the essence of that, I think.
And of course, it would be a fugue at the center, wouldn't it? Bach, the master of the fugue of all things.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. Counterpoint as the sort of central pillar of the work.
Yes, but of course, and then the other 6 movements, the chorale movements, being so homophonic, sort of in contrasting with that. It's a little bit like a cantata in some ways, unaccompanied. Well, accompanied by continuo only, isn't it?
Yeah.
In that it's so complicated and chorale centered.
It is, and in fact, the chorale is perhaps more present here than in a cantata, insofar as the chorale is you hear the verses of the chorale sung with varied harmonies, but the chorale is very very present in those particular sections of the whole work. And the wonder of those chorales is the different harmonizations that Bach gives them. So,
is it different every time?
it is, yes, which is
So you get 6 versions.
indeed, yeah, yeah. And then, of course, you also get the chorale appearing. There's a beautiful concertante movement towards the end, Gute Nacht, where we bid the soul farewell. And there, no continuo. Well, we use continuo, but no bass, as it were. Just the tenor singing a lovely walking quaver bass line. Then the chorale appearing occasionally in the alto, and then these beautiful 2 sopranos singing in duets above. It's, I think, perhaps for me, you know, the sort of the hairs on the back of the neck moment in the whole work is that movement.
Yes, and I noticed that Paul McGoff, the bass, actually stepped off camera just for that movement, and then stepped back in for the chorale following it, just to emphasize that in some way. Yeah.
Yeah. It was Paul's favourite movement from the work, I think, so he probably wanted to have a good listen.
And he didn't have to sing it, of course.
Yes.
So it's all sacred music this evening, and of course performed in St. Finbarr's Cathedral, but not performed in a liturgical setting, as it were, not in a service. Do you think there's a different feel when you're performing sacred music in a concert situation, even if you are in a church?
Yes, inevitably it is different, though I have to say the atmosphere that we felt in St. Finbarr's in rehearsing and performing there without an audience, it was quasi-liturgical in a way. There was a sense of being held by the building and without the sort of the public spectacle, if you like. So in these COVID days where, you know, we're not in usual performing mode, there is that wonderful sort of grey area where you're not, it could be either in a way. But I think this program is so interesting because it does bring sacred and secular together. The Monteverdi duet, for instance, Venite, Venite, setting texts, a text from the Song of Solomon, which is love poetry really in the Bible, and I think that really bridges the world between sacred and secular um, in a sort of very beautiful way.
Yes, yes, of course. And the other Monteverdi piece, well, the one you just mentioned, Venita Venita, is for two sopranos and harp, and you didn't play anything in that, did you?
No, I mean the wonderful thing about having more than one continuous instrument is that you can sort of orchestrate the program and decide what plays where. And Siobhan and I had great fun doing that in all the pieces. Actually, we could, for instance, in some of the Shine and Shoots pieces, Siobhan would play with the upper voices, I would play with the lower voices. So even though we only had 5 singers and 2 players, we were able to create the effect of a sort of multiple choir sort of sonority. And that's I think one of the great joys of this music with the continuo is mixing and matching, finding new ways of bringing things out in the music by which instruments you use.
Yeah, and actually the only piece we haven't touched on is the other Monteverdi piece, Laudate Dominum, which is tenor solo, and then you and Siobhan both played, didn't you?
Yes.
And there's a big flourish at the beginning of that. That's to do with the text, I think, isn't it?
Yes, well, I mean, Laudate Dominum. Obviously, it's a hymn of praise, if you like, words from the Psalms. But of course, all Monteverdi writes at the beginning is just a G in the bass and a D and then a G.
And you're left to play with that.
Decided to have a little bit of fun with that. Yeah. But there are lots of other opportunities in that particular piece as well, with its reference to praise him with the psaltery, with the harp, praise him with the trumpet, and so on. It's all those images from Psalm 150. So we had great fun with that as well, finding little ways that we could just sort of try and bring the text to life.
Playing with the words and word painting.
Yes, which is one of the great joys of continuo playing, is you can do that.
So I think it's almost time for the concert. Thank you very much, Mark, for joining us. If you haven't got your tickets for the 8 o'clock performance, you need to go to corkchoral.ie. This isn't one to miss. Make sure you are ready with your cup of tea, your glass of wine, whatever it is that you're drinking this evening. And thank you once again to Mark for such an interesting conversation. I've enjoyed it a lot. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Peter. Great to be with you.